Buongiorno, buonasera.
Buongiorno Steve, come stai?
Molto bene, grazie. E lei? Lei? E tu?
Lei, vabbè. Bene, bene,
Bene.
un po' stanco, ma sto
Stanco,
bene.
stanco, anch'io. We will switch to English because it's easier for me. You know, this is the problem with English speakers. They always force their language on other people. So that,
Well, yeah, but you can find ways to, try to speak other languages, even if it's sometimes it's true.
I mean, although I prefer to speak other languages, the reality is today that it's more practical in most situations to speak English. However
That's
much
true.
we may be politically motivated to want to speak Esperanto or anything else, English ends up being the most practical solution. So I'm very glad to have the opportunity to talk to you. I have been watching your activity on the internet. And as I said in that little presentation I made to that conference in Moscow, where both you and Richard made excellent presentations. I remember your earliest videos where you were sort of sitting in your porch somewhere in Rome, and there's
Yes,
this guy like, "Hey, I'm here. I speak
yes.
languages too." And now you've kind of become the superstar of polyglot. So congratulations! It's great, really great to see.
Oh, I don't know about that.
No, and I tell
Thank you.
you, I'm always amazed. Not that you speak Spanish well or French well, but I mean your accent in German and or in Swedish or in Chinese and Russian is just spectacular. So
Thank you.
full of admiration. How's your Japanese coming along?
I have to tell you the truth. I'm still struggling a little bit in the sense that, for me, the main issue is syntax in that regard, forming sentences. It's not pronunciation, it's not words. It's more like syntax. And when I have to try to form more complex sentences, we have to put the I think at the end, etc. I do speak Japanese, but I'm still struggling a little bit because it's the first time that I try to tackle a language with such a syntax. So I was
Yeah,
a little bit taken aback at the beginning. Now I'm doing better. But as I always say, even when you struggle, I see the peak of the mountain. I see the blue sky. For me, the blue sky is like, the general picture. I see the mountain, but I know that I'm going to make it. I'm sure I'm going to make it. I have
oh
no
yeah.
doubt about that.
And you know, realistically, as someone who lived in Japan for 9 years, it takes a long time.
It does.
And so yeah, one just has to enjoy it and stay the course, and eventually it gets better. Things that seem so strange at first eventually
Exactly.
become
Exactly.
natural. They eventually come natural. Not a problem.
Exactly. Well, at the beginning I thought maybe I'm not that good at languages because I try to with Japanese in other languages such as I don't know, Spanish or other languages it was relatively easy, but with Japanese, even with Chinese, it was not that difficult. Of course, it was a little bit more complicated, but with Japanese, I found more problems than the other. So I told myself, am I gonna make it? But then I told myself, a dear friend of mine told me, look, Luca, in order to speak Japanese fluently, takes a long time. It's not something that happens out of the blue, So I just,
Right.
I felt relieved in a way. I said, okay, it's gonna take me a couple of years. It doesn't matter. The important thing is that you enjoy it. If you enjoy it, and I do,
Exactly. Exactly. What does it matter? Is it who you're competing with? You know. So yeah,
exactly. I'm not.
it's. I found with Japanese that some of the bigger problems were. I mean, with every language, at some point you feel that all the words sound the same, and then you eventually get over that. But in Japanese, that's more the case because they have so few sounds. So wakarimasu, kawarimasu, they all at some point to me they all sound the same. What I also found difficult in Japanese is this sort of yatte kureru, yatte morau, yatte ageru, yatte itadaku. The sort of the second that those two part verbs where the second one tells you the direction and the level of politeness. So
But I think there's more to it. For example, I have to, have also to understand it's a very situational language. You have to know who you're talking to, then you have to know who you are, and
right.
then you have to know where you are, where you're going. It's not that easy. Sometimes you even have the problem of foreigners learning, for example, Japanese from Japanese girls, and they tend to speak like
Right.
the Japanese girls sometimes, using words that are not supposed to be pronounced. And I also heard, I've never seen it firsthand, but I did have content with Japanese that you have to know how to act and react in certain situations. So like in every language, it's not just the language in itself, but it's also the culture, the attitude, the social behavior, etc., etc. So We Europeans, we are different, even with Canadians and Americans.
Italians, particularly.
Italians.
I'm just joking.
No, I'm kidding. Yeah, me too. But the thing is that with other cultures, this gap is more evident. But it's fun. It's cool in a way
Yeah.
to go in and try to understand another world.
Right. I mean, I have to say that for me, it wasn't so difficult because I had the good fortune of actually living. I learned all my Japanese living in Japan, which was the only place where I've learned the language in the country. And
But you wanted to learn it because there's so many people who live in Japan and they don't speak the language at all.
I know. I know.
Yeah.
And I think having characters is a big advantage as well because then you can read more. And as you know, I like reading, lots reading and listening, and so. But anyway, Japanese. But the interesting thing is, my son, who played professional hockey in Japan for 3 years, he doesn't read Japanese. So he since coming back to Canada, learned the characters. But he learned to speak quite well just because he was with the guys on the team. But he speaks a completely different Japanese from what I speak. I speak the Japanese that enables me to do business, and it's much more formal and stuff. And his is all that sort of around beer and noodles, and so it's quite a different Japanese.
I think it depends on your experiences as well. It depends on the people you connect with, the way you speak, because we're the sum of experiences of the people we connect with, as well as the books we read and what we listen to. So yeah.
Okay, now this brings us to one of the points that I'd like to discuss with you. Here we are, 2013, soon to be 2014. You just finished saying that, and I confirm that many foreigners live in Japan and never learn Japanese, even though they're surrounded by the language. And I'm going to talk a little later about some Chinese immigrants I know who live here in Canada and who don't learn English properly. And here you are in Italy or Paris or Poland or wherever you are, and you're learning Japanese. What has changed in the world of language learning?
Everything, I would say. In the last, especially in the last 20 years, everything has changed. If you consider there's just one word, the internet. When we think about the internet in general, what happens is that people tend to, for example, to think that it's not easy to learn a language if you don't live in the country or whatever excuse they might come up with. But with the internet, and thanks to the internet, nowadays it is possible to do an amazing quantity of things. It's amazing, and a lot of people are not. I think that the last step, and this is a very important point, is that I noticed that a lot of people don't know how to use the internet. If you learn how to use the internet, you can cover all areas of language learning. Listening, reading, speaking, whatever you want. And
grammar references.
It's incredible. It's just in the last, especially in the last 3 years, I realized what is possible and the things that are on the internet, and they're for free. There's even a lot of resources, people willing to help. It's mind-boggling, But the point is that a lot of people find themselves in front of an ocean because the internet is an ocean. There's so much that you have to learn how to pick up the right resources, otherwise you get lost. One of the questions that I get asked the most often is, I'm lost, Luca. What do I have to do to learn this? I don't know how to start with. This is the main problem. But then if you learn how to select a few things that are efficient, I think that everything is possible, no matter where you live.
I would add, too, the internet is the hub, but then the development of MP3 technology. I mean, there's a lot of things that go around it. The MP3 player. I mean, I carry in my little iPod Nano here, I've got, this just blows any university language lab out of existence. Basically, this beats any language lab in the world because I can put on there libraries of content in audio, and of course, then find the text on the internet.
Exactly. But how would you select your content? What do you do? For example, it depends on what. The problem is that it is true that there are a lot of things. But one of the things that people ask me, for example, is that, well, I don't understand. If I listen, I don't understand.
Right.
Tend to pick up. They tend to, select things that might interest them, but they're not able to understand.
Right.
So what I always tell them is that if you have a script, that's even better.
Right.
According to, I saw a very, very interesting video recently. It's in German. Unfortunately, there are no English subtitles, I think, but hopefully people will be able to watch it in English. He said, I am not sure he's right, but according to some recent research, listening and reading at the same time makes you, the information stick to your brain much more than if you just read or you just listened. Now, I don't know whether it is right or not, but I have to say that this is what I do all the time. I start by listening and reading. At the beginning, listening and reading a lot. Mm-hmm. And, it creates a bond between the sound and the words.
I agree with you. People say, well, I'm an auditory learner, or I'm a visual learner, or I'm a kinetic learner. And there's a professor in the United States whose name escapes me who has completely debunked this theory. I mean, we are all auditory, visual, you name it. We need all of these different things. We may prefer to listen or prefer to read or prefer to speak, but essentially we need to do all of them. Whether you need 60% of this and 30% of that, I don't know, but we need them all. And I agree with you. And I in the initial stages, I tend to listen and read at the same time. And then later on, because if I can listen without reading, then I can listen while driving, I can listen while doing the dishes, I can listen while exercising. So listening is that great activity that you can do wherever you want. I think we froze in here. Hello? Okay, I'll somehow splice these together. So the thing about listening on its own is that it frees up so much dead time. But everything that I listen to, I will eventually read it and transcribe it. As you know, I work on links, so I'll save the words and phrases, and then I go back and I do a lot of listening. But as to where to start, it is amazing the resources that you discover. Like in the case of Czech and Russian, what's available on the radio is amazing. But even for Romanian, I found tremendous resources. The difficulty is to get from ground zero to where you can access some of these radio programs on history and literature and stuff like that. And there, of course, we have a library link. But for Romanian, I just went on the internet. There's a outsourcing site called Elance. And I did up about 200-300 sentences of basic patterns. Why, because, since, therefore. And I said, I want these translated into Romanian and recorded for me. And so I got those, and that was a big part of what... I mean, those first few months, you got to work with boring stuff to get to where you can actually start dealing with interesting material. Yes. But then you search podcast, news, whatever, Romanian, Japanese, you find all kinds of stuff.
I think that the first 3 to 6 months are the most difficult. But once you pass that stage, it's like a hill. It goes, it's easy, But a lot of people, I think they give up in the first 3 months.
It's easy in the sense of being more fun.
Yes,
but it's still a long road. It's still a long road.
Of course, I agree. I agree that it's easier in the sense that, to me, since it's fun and since you can start using the language, not only listening to it, it's because you enjoy it, but also go out and talk to people. I think I don't even think about time anymore. No. When people think I think a lot of people focus too much on time. They shouldn't think, okay, I did this 30 minutes, then 45, then I did that. When you start enjoying something, you don't think about time anymore.
Exactly. And one thing you said earlier, which is so true, which perhaps is particularly the case with Japanese, but is equally the case with Italian or French or Chinese or German or Swedish, is that to achieve fluency, that vague term, but a high degree of proficiency, it's not just the language or the words, it's also that familiarity with the culture. You have to start to have that you have to absorb some of those other behavioral aspects of that language and culture, and that takes time.
That takes time. Yeah. But what I do when I incorporate this in my my way of learning languages has changed a little bit. Is that I think that human interaction is so important. Mm-hmm. Languages are communication tool. It might sound trivial, but that's what it is. So I realized that all the languages that I speak well are the languages that I spoke the most. Obviously, the more you speak, the better you get.
Absolutely.
So what happened is that when people ask me, for example, how do you do that for German, for example? Well, what happened is that I embraced the German culture. And when I was in Rome, I lived with Germans. I lived my life in German. I went out with Germans. I had, a German girlfriend, and that changes things,
Right.
hugely. It's not just about, obviously. I really like, the culture is amazing. My favorite writer is German. I love German books and German literature. So I spent a lot of time with that. But finally, you have to make a distinction between you. I think that a lot of people are confused about, for example, being C2. They talk about C2, C2, C2. It's not a matter of being C2 or not C2, or they think, for example, that if you don't know a certain word, you're not C2. That has
That's.
nothing to do
I mean,
with
there's
that.
there's some person on the internet saying that if you don't know how to say tie your shoelaces or I need a monkey wrench, that you. I mean, that's just so silly. And one thing you said in an interview that I saw, which was interesting, someone said, "Well, I have a problem figuring out whether these words are beginner words, intermediate words, or advanced words." And you said, like, it doesn't matter. And I agree. I mean, obviously, it's easier to deal with texts initially that have a lot of high frequency words. But if you need
Hmm.
the word, if you like the word, you're going to learn the word, like the word. And by the same token, I mean, I may not know how to say toothbrush or shoelace in a language
Exactly.
where I can discuss philosophy. It doesn't matter. What's relevant to
Exactly.
me?
Exactly. So if somebody says to you, for example, that you can, somebody asked me, and I think it was in that Google Hangout, and somebody asked me, for example, I can now hold political discussions, but think about Italy, think about Canada itself, think about the United States. I think there's a layer of the population, even if they are native speakers, even if English is their native language, it doesn't necessarily mean that they can hold conversations about topics such as politics because they're not interested. We talk and we can talk about things we are interested in, and we live. That's as simple as that.
Right.
Of course, it's true that when you live in a foreign country, for example, I've been living here for the last 3 years. All sorts of things happen. For example, in the apartment, I have to change the light. I have to do that. I have to do that. But
Right.
when you have, I call it a core. But when you've built the capacity of interacting with people, well, you search for the word on the internet and then you go for it. You
Or
just
you
go there
ask
and
the
say, hey,
guy,
look,
how do you say light
right,
bulb? Ampoule. Okay. From there,
ampoule,
pardon?
ampoule, and you
Yeah.
say, okay, that's it, and then
Done.
and then you do it. So, for
Prior to
example,
that
building it.
date, you didn't need that word. So it wasn't part of your vocabulary.
But I don't need it. I don't have it now. I just threw it 5 minutes 5 minutes ago. But I could even use my words, my hands if I wanted to. I
Yeah.
have an ampoule just in front of my eyes, and I say I want this. So
Yeah.
with some objects it's much easier. Then when you have to I don't know, explain to the technician that something happened in the apartment. But it's something that you learn as we learn in our native tongue. It's exactly the same thing. It has nothing to do with being super fluent, not super fluent, academic speech or not. There's a lot of confusion about this.
Exactly. Now, you mentioned this thing, you learn the things that are of interest to you. So the whole, obviously, interest is extremely important. We're eventually going to get to how this applies to teaching languages or learning languages in the classroom. But we talked about interest in people learning or not learning the language when they're surrounded by the language, as in foreigners who live in Japan and who don't learn Japanese.
Hmm.
So I have a Chinese friend here, very nice guy. He's been here for 7 years. His son speaks English like a Canadian. He can basically. We were driving in the car and we were going to dinner, and there was lots of traffic. We turned on the traffic radio station, and they told us which streets were crowded. And I said, "How much of that do you understand?" Like, we speak Chinese. He said, like, zero, zero. And yet he goes to government sponsored language school, and he's got nothing to do. He's quite wealthy. He sits around, got nothing to do all day, and I keep on pushing him. Learn. And now I'm actually going to start. I told him I'm going to give you 15 minutes to half an hour a day of English to see if we can't get you jump started. So he's interested in the sense that, like, he traveled to Italy. He likes to travel. He likes being outside China. He very much would like to be a man of the world. Blah blah blah. And he says when he listens to English, his mind just tunes out. Like, he can't do it. So therefore, I'm saying the guy's not really interested in the language. He's interested in being fluent. If he spent $10,000 and he could now be fluent, he'd be interested. But
Well,
and he's not the only one that's like that. So I'd be interested in your comments on that.
I would say that there are two main things that are happening right now, especially with people living in country and not being able to speak a language. First, the psychological factor plays a huge role. If you don't believe that you can make it, first
Mm-hmm.
of all, then there's a psychological barrier. I don't know that person. I don't know your Chinese friend, but by talking to him, the first thing that I would try to do is to understand the reasons why he has this block first, because as I said before, in language learning, as another cognitive processes, the psychological factor plays a huge role. And secondly, I think they just step into this language ground with the wrong mentality, because you think exactly as you said, he wants to be fluent, but he doesn't do anything about it. He just thinks, okay, I just want to be fluent. It's a dream, but then and I think I might be wrong here. I might be criticized for saying this, but I think that language learning is it's not as difficult as people make language learning much more complicated than when it actually is. It's not, obviously, it's a complex process in the sense that there's a lot of factors involved, but learning a language, learning a language even from scratch, you didn't learn it at school. It's not because I did it. Okay, obviously I did it many times, so I got better with time. But I can prove to you by showing you what I did with my students. I'm teaching lots of people from everywhere in the world, no matter where you are. If you tell them you don't have to tell them what you do, but you show them that they can do it, and then do what you like and do it abiding by these principles. They learn amazingly fast, and much faster than any. A lot of people told me. I'm not gonna quote any. Cite any name, but I went to the school. I paid a lot of bucks. I spent a lot of money, and I didn't succeed because they told me, well, do this, and they didn't give me a guide, or they didn't tell me what to do. And I told them, look, it's much easier than it actually looks. And when they start doing it, they realize that it's actually true, and they learn much faster because they start believing in themselves.
So you think the biggest factor is their belief in themselves?
It's not just about believing in themselves. It's a lot of many things. For example, one of the very first things that I teach my students is learn how to use the internet by doing certain things. For example, learn how to select resources and learn how to use them in a very specific way. Then try to abide by the principle of try to learn every single day. Try to vary your work. Just don't always do the same thing every day, but just try to, differentiate and do something else. Try to stick to the principle, the space-time repetition, whatever you want to call it. There are some things that make it, efficient, because just repetition is great, but there's ways to repeat things that make it efficient or not efficient. Then people can choose whatever they want to do that or don't. I tell them, try. It's a trial and error process. Just try to find your way, because I think it's a personal road. Honestly, language learning, there's not one single recipe for everybody. You have to understand it. So I can help you as a teacher or as a guide. I can help you figure out what the best path for you is. Once you find it, bingo, you've won the war. You've won the battle. I don't delude myself into thinking that if I'm the teacher who tells you exactly what you have to do, then you're going to learn a language. People might refuse that. You are imposing something. When people feel like somebody is imposing their ideas on them, they tend to, even if they tell you, it's great, fantastic, I'm going to follow your advice, they don't do it. Right. Because in the comfort of their place, they're going to do something else. And right. that's how it works.
Now, perhaps the final question is, how does all of this affect language learning in the classroom, and what is the future of language learning in the classroom?
That's a very interesting question. Now, I believe that there are still good teachers. I believe there are excellent teachers around the world. And there are excellent teachers. There are poor teachers and excellent teachers, like in every other field. Now, having said that, I do believe that, honestly, the classroom. I think that the classroom is not necessarily a bad thing, but the classroom makes sense just if, when you go back home, you do the things that you have to do. Now, personally, I have to say that the reason why I would go to a class or a classroom is to connect with other people. Hey, what are you doing? Going out, but not so much language learning. But this is just me. I think that according to the statistics. I've recently seen some statistics according to which I don't know 80% of the people don't learn that well in classrooms, and they tend to
Right.
to think that the classrooms are not good. But we have to make a distinction. There is high school. There are specific schools. Recently, I was in the airplane and I met a girl. She was Polish, and she told me about military programs. For example, there are some things, institutions that are very special and that they're very efficient. But the reason why they're efficient is not necessarily because a language in a learning in a classroom is necessarily better. It's just because she told me that all these officials are extremely motivated to learn the language, because if they learn a language, they can go living in whatever it's in Poland or in Russia. So when you and also in these military schools, you have 3 or 4 students. You don't have 34. One of the things I don't like about classrooms, for example, is that when you have other students, they, to me, accent is important. So
Yes.
sometimes you have people butchering or just pronouncing poorly, and I want contact with native speakers,
Yeah,
then
me too.
I can talk to other people as well. But maybe I'm a little bit selfish in this regard. But I want to hear the real language. If I have to hear, I don't know, another Italian trying to pronounce something, to me, I wouldn't call it a waste of time, because still there is a value in interacting with people, seeing people smile, etc. But honestly, I think that if I can skip a classroom, I learn faster.
Yeah.
This is my conclusion. I'm not saying that it's a universal thing. I think that going to a classroom could be a good experience, especially if you want to connect with other people. But to me, it's not the best environment just to learn for.
But given that most people aren't motivated enough to do anything, uh,
Well,
but then then okay, so the classroom, at least there's an element of coercion. You have to go there every day,
not necessarily in the sense that if we talk about high schools, that's true.
right?
They tell you, well, you have to learn Spanish because in America, Spanish or whatever, French. But in other examples, people enroll at certain schools because they're extremely motivated. For example, l'Alliance Française here
Right.
in Paris, a lot of foreigners. I saw it because I did this test for Alliance Française, and I saw a lot of, especially Japanese and Chinese people, they went there because they wanted to live in France. So the first thing that they did is just go to Alliance Française because it was the remedy. The best
And
way
it's
is
the
just to go
brand.
to.
And it's the brand.
Exactly. It's a brand. So they went there, and they have labs and they have a few things. But I don't know how much they. Honestly, I think it's a good organization. I don't know Alliance Française, so I cannot judge. But to me, if I didn't speak French at all, the first thing that I would do before going to France is trying to learn French for 3 months before hitting France. And
Absolutely.
when you have, a foundation of language, things are much smoother than when
Right.
you, for example, say, go there directly and you have and you think, you have the nerve of thinking that you can go to a country and learn the language immediately out of the blue. It doesn't happen like that. You have to put the seed in your brain.
Okay, but that still doesn't deal with the essential question of what the future of the language classroom is. And I can give you an
Um,
example here in Vancouver. We have lots of ESL schools, foreigners who come here. Many of them have a significant level of English already, and they come here and they spend $1,200 a month. They spend another $700-800 a month to live with the family, not to mention the ticket to come over here. And they spend 3 months, 6 months, and I think in many cases their English doesn't improve very much. So those are people who haven't come here to learn from scratch. I totally agree with you. To go to the language, go to the country and start from scratch is a waste of time. You should definitely invest that time at home. But if you're going to do it at home, you've got to have some of the experience that you or I have about how to do that. And you have to be motivated. But
well,
even for the person who has a certain level in the language, goes to the classroom, and the classroom, they do all the role playing and all the other stuff that they do. And let's pretend that I'm the cashier and you're buying stuff in my store and all this kind of stuff. And at the end of it, I don't think they learn as much as you learn in an equivalent 3 month period.
I agree, but I have to say at the same time that talking about the future, what is going to happen in the next 20 years. Um, I have to say that the internet is changing the way people learn languages, but at the same time, what I notice by talking to some people is that they think that the only way to learn a language Okay, first, they think that the only way to learn a language is going to school,
Mm-hmm.
and second, they don't like learning by themselves. They
No.
need somebody. The older generation. This is what I notice by talking to people, is that they tend to think that they have to go to school because that's how they see the world. It's how they've been, they're used to this kind of
Right.
thing. So I don't think that the schools are going to die as far as language learning is concerned. There's still going to be a lot of institutions, and there's still going to be a lot of people going there. But I think that the internet and self learning, they can be a compendium. They can be something that can be. I always tell people, if you want to go to school. But first and foremost, what you have to do is learn how to learn things,
Mm-hmm.
by yourself.
Right.
To me, self-learning is extremely important.
Absolutely.
People talking about, for example, the importance of academia or talking about certain things. I do believe that in talking about language learning specifically, there might be some people who have never gone to university, especially people who go to university to learn languages, for example, and they end up speaking much better because the system is you. Actually, in Italy, you don't go there. You don't go there to university to learn a language. You learn the literature. You learn other things. But the real learning happens somewhere else. This is
Right.
what I've noticed because I talked, and I do have students who went to university. They were extremely disappointed with that system, and they told me, "Look, I am trying another way." They had the courage. They summed up the courage to follow a different path. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that people who make videos on YouTube talking about language learning can do a big favor, because many people are not afraid that there's another alternative and
Mm-hmm.
more efficient world, or maybe not more efficient, but there's another world that can help them learn a language in a
Right.
different way.
And I have the feeling that we could probably talk for another few hours on this subject. But I know that you have an appointment. You're going out, so I appreciate you
Yes.
taking the time, and all the best. And and what comes after Japanese?
Do you want to know? I was thinking of Hungarian.
Oh wow. Okay. Good luck.
Hungarian, Serbian as well, and actually Thai is one of my.
All right.
It's been in my mind, but we'll,
Yeah.
we'll see what happens. It's when you talk about choosing a language. Sometimes languages choose me.
Yeah.
So I will let these beautiful girls choose me instead
Hey.
of choose.
There you go. Okay. No beautiful girls choose me, so I have to choose the languages myself.
I'm not sure about that.
Okay. Thank you very much, and we will
Steve,
hopefully we'll have another opportunity to do this.
of course, it was a pleasure as always.
Absolutely. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thanks. Ciao.